judge sentences an innocent black man to death, but just 5 minutes later he does the unthinkable. He arrests him. Why would an innocent man turn the tables on the very judge who condemned him? What shocking secret is about to unravel? This is a fight for justice you won't believe. Stay tuned. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The early morning sun cast long shadows through the dusty windows of Nathaniel Dawson's garage. The metal roll-up door creaked as he lifted it, letting in the cool morning air that carried the scent of dew and distant exhaust. His footsteps echoed in the empty space as he made his way to the workbench, running his hand along its familiar surface, feeling every nick and dent that told stories of years of hard work. The smell of motor oil and metal filled his nostrils, a scent that had become as natural to him as breathing. Tools lined the walls in perfect order, each one hanging exactly where it belonged, a testament to his methodical nature. Nathaniel had built this place from nothing, turning an old abandoned garage into his livelihood through sheer determination and skill, working late nights and weekends when others had written the building off as beyond saving. Even now, he took pride in the worn concrete floor he'd resurfaced himself and the sturdy shelves he'd constructed from reclaimed lumber. His weathered hands moved automatically, gathering the tools he'd need for the day's first job. The silver Honda waiting for attention had a troublesome transmission, the kind of challenge he usually enjoyed tackling. But today his mind wandered as he worked, his thoughts drifting back to darker times that never seemed to fully release their grip on him. He popped the hood and stared at the engine, trying to focus on the task at hand rather than the memories threatening to surface. The rhythmic clink of metal against metal took him back 15 years, to the sound of handcuffs closing around his father's wrists. The memory was still sharp enough to make his jaw clench and his chest tighten. His father, Thomas Dawson, had been a pillar of their community, a man who'd never even had a parking ticket, who coached Little League on weekends and fixed neighbors' cars for free. But none of that had mattered when they'd accused him of a crime he didn't commit. The injustice of it all still burned in Nathaniel's gut like acid. Nathaniel's hands stilled on the wrench as he remembered his father's face that day in court, the dignity in those eyes, even as the judge handed down a sentence that would destroy their family. Judge Mitchell hadn't even bothered to hide his bias, his gavel coming down like a hammer on their lives. The system had failed them completely, crushing not just his father's life, but the faith of an entire community who watched helplessly as justice turned a blind eye. The sound of footsteps pulled him from his thoughts. Carlos, one of his regular customers, appeared in the doorway, envelope in hand, his cheerful presence a stark contrast to Nathaniel's somber mood. "Morning, Nathaniel. Brought that payment for last week's repair. Right on time like I promised." Carlos's wide smile and easy manner were like sunshine breaking through clouds. Nathaniel straightened up, wiping his hands on the red shop rag tucked into his belt. "Morning, Carlos. How's the car running?" he asked, grateful for the interruption from memories that threatened to pull him under. He tucked the rag back into his pocket, forcing himself to be present in the moment. "Like a dream, man. You've got magic hands with these engines." Carlos grinned, handing over the envelope. "Can't believe how hot it's getting already. Summer's coming early this year, huh? My kids are already begging to hit the pool. Maria's planning a barbecue next weekend if you want to stop by." "Sure seems that way," Nathaniel replied, managing a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He pocketed the envelope without counting it. Carlos was always good for it. "Thanks for the invite. I'll see how things look." The conversation was simple, safe, the kind that didn't require him to dig deep or reveal too much. Carlos was a good customer, always prompt with payments and friendly without being pushy, respecting the invisible boundary Nathaniel kept around himself. As Carlos left with a wave, Nathaniel returned to the Honda, his movements precise and focused. Each turn of the wrench, each careful adjustment was a reminder of how he'd rebuilt his life piece by piece. This garage was his sanctuary, a place where problems had clear solutions, unlike the tangled mess of injustice that had claimed his father and still threatened to claim him. Here, at least, he was in control. The morning wore on as he worked, the familiar routine of diagnosing and fixing mechanical issues providing a steady rhythm to his thoughts. Sweat beaded on his forehead as the temperature climbed, but he barely noticed, lost in the meditative focus of his work. The radio in the corner played softly, old country songs his father used to love. When the job was finally done, he stood back, examining his work with careful eyes, checking and double-checking. The satisfaction of a job well done settled over him, a brief respite from the heavier thoughts that always seemed to linger just below the surface, waiting for a quiet moment to resurface. His stomach growled, reminding him it was time for lunch. He cleaned his tools meticulously, placing each one back in its designated spot, before heading toward the door. The outside world waited, with all its complications and painful memories, but for now he'd take this small victory. Another car fixed, another day survived. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but in this moment, Nathaniel found a sliver of peace in the simple completion of honest work. The morning news blared from every television and radio across the city. Breaking news: Isabel Holloway found dead. The shocking headline dominated every channel, casting a dark shadow over the usually bustling metropolis. Outside coffee shops and newsstands, people gathered in clusters, their faces drawn with concern as they discussed the tragic discovery. Some clutched their paper cups tighter, as if holding on to something familiar might keep the shocking news at bay. Mothers pulled children closer, lowering their voices when little ears wandered too near their conversations about the city's latest tragedy. Isabel Holloway's apartment, a luxurious penthouse in the city's most exclusive district, had become the center of attention. Police cars lined the street, their lights reflecting off the glass-fronted building in rhythmic flashes of blue and red. Crime scene technicians in white suits moved methodically in and out of the entrance, their presence drawing curious onlookers who pressed against the yellow police tape, necks craned for a glimpse of something, anything that might satisfy their morbid curiosity. Neighbors peered from behind curtains, some taking photos with their phones to share in group chats that buzzed with wild theories. Detective Erica Wells stood in Isabel's bedroom, her experienced eyes taking in every detail. The room was immaculate. Too immaculate, she thought, like a museum display rather than a lived-in space. The detective's dark hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, her sharp features set in concentration as she studied the scene. Something felt off about the perfectly arranged furniture and pristine surfaces. Not a single item seemed out of place, not even a drawer partially open or a pillow askew. Even the bed sheets were unwrinkled, as if they'd been pressed moments before her arrival. "Detective Wells," a junior officer called from the doorway, his voice tinged with urgency. "The Holloway family's lawyer is here again. They're demanding updates. Says they won't leave until they speak with you directly." He shifted uncomfortably, clearly intimidated by the powerful family's representatives waiting downstairs. Erica sighed, feeling the weight of pressure building on her shoulders like a physical burden. The Holloways weren't just any family. They owned half the city's real estate and had connections reaching into every corner of power. Their daughter had been a fixture in society pages, known for her charity work and social gatherings. Now those same society pages were filled with speculation about her death, transforming overnight from celebratory profiles to somber obituaries. Photos that once showcased her vibrant smile now appeared haunting, almost prophetic in their frozen moments of happiness. Outside, news vans clogged the streets, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like metal flowers. Reporters stood before cameras, recounting Isabel's last known movements with practiced gravity in their voices. "Sources say Ms. Holloway was last seen leaving the annual Children's Hospital benefit," one reporter announced, her voice carrying across the crowded sidewalk as she gestured toward the building. "The police have yet to name any suspects or reveal the cause of death." Behind her, a makeup artist darted in between takes, powdering the reporter's forehead in the summer heat. In a diner across town, Nathaniel Dawson sat at the counter, finishing his sandwich, trying to ignore the buzz of conversation around him. The television mounted on the wall showed footage of Isabel at various social events, always smiling, always perfectly dressed in designer outfits that probably cost more than his monthly rent. The contrast between her world and his couldn't have been starker. He wiped his mouth with a paper napkin, feeling strangely disconnected from the tragedy unfolding on screen. His calloused hands, stained with motor oil from a morning at the garage, seemed to belong to an entirely different universe than Isabel's manicured existence. "Terrible thing," the waitress said, refilling his coffee cup with a practiced pour. "My sister's friend worked as a maid for the Holloways. Said Isabel was always kind to the staff, unlike some of those rich folks. Always remembered birthdays, left generous tips during holidays." She shook her head sadly, the coffee pot trembling slightly in her weathered hand. Groups of people at nearby tables whispered theories about the murder, their voices a mix of fascination and fear that rose and fell like waves. "I heard it was a robbery gone wrong," one man said, leaning in conspiratorially. "No way," another responded, tapping his fork against his plate for emphasis. "Everything in that apartment was untouched. Has to be someone who knew her, maybe even someone close." A woman at the end of the counter crossed herself quietly, murmuring a prayer for the deceased. The city hummed with speculation, fear, and morbid curiosity that seemed to electrify the very air. Detective Wells's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, superior officers, and the Holloway family's representatives all demanding answers she didn't have yet. As she stood in Isabel's apartment, surrounded by the trappings of wealth and privilege, she couldn't shake the feeling that this case would shake the city to its core, exposing secrets that powerful people had long kept buried. The pristine room around her felt like a stage set, carefully arranged to tell a story that wasn't entirely true. The morning sun cast long shadows through the garage windows as Nathaniel worked methodically on a Toyota's transmission. His hands moved with practiced precision, finding comfort in the familiar routine of nuts, bolts, and metal. The radio hummed quietly in the background, news reports about the Holloway murder occasionally breaking through the static. He tried to ignore them, focusing instead on the mechanical puzzle before him, a welcome distraction from the nagging worries that had kept him up most of the night. A sharp knock echoed through the garage, causing Nathaniel to bump his head on the hood. Wincing, he rubbed the sore spot and turned to see two uniformed officers standing in the doorway, their faces stern and official. Officer Randall, the taller of the two, stepped forward, his boots clicking against the concrete floor. "Nathaniel Dawson?" His voice was flat, professional with no hint of warmth. "We need you to come with us to the station." Nathaniel wiped his hands slowly on his work rag, confusion creasing his brow. A knot formed in his stomach as he studied their expressions. "What's this about?" "The Holloway murder investigation," the second officer stated, his hand resting casually near his holster. "We have a witness placing you near the victim's apartment on the night of the crime." The words hit Nathaniel like a physical blow, making him step back against the car. "That's impossible. I was home all night. I've never even met Isabel Holloway." His heart hammered against his ribs as a familiar sense of dread washed over him. Officer Randall pulled out a document, the official letterhead visible even from where Nathaniel stood. "This witness statement says otherwise, Mr. Dawson, and we'll need to search your premises." Before Nathaniel could protest, the second officer was already moving through the garage, opening drawers and checking shelves with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, he emerged holding a plastic evidence bag containing a bloody knife, its blade catching the morning light. "Care to explain this?" Officer Randall's eyes hardened, all pretense of neutrality gone. Nathaniel stared at the knife, his mind reeling. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the morning chill. "That's not mine. I've never seen it before. Someone must have planted it." His voice sounded hollow even to his own ears. The drive to the police station passed in a blur of sirens and street signs. Nathaniel sat in the back seat, his wrists uncomfortable in the tight handcuffs, his mind racing through the events that had led him here. The familiar weight of injustice settled on his shoulders, reminiscent of his father's wrongful conviction years ago. History was repeating itself, just as he had always feared it might. At the station, Detective Erica Wells waited in the interrogation room. Her dark eyes studied Nathaniel as he was led in, taking in his oil-stained hands and honest confusion. She tapped a pen against her notepad, her expression calculating. "Mr. Dawson," she began, spreading photographs across the table like a macabre deck of cards. "Your fingerprints were found on the murder weapon. A witness places you at the scene. Want to tell me what happened that night?" "None of this makes sense." Nathaniel's voice remained steady despite his racing heart. He stared at the gruesome photos, forcing himself not to look away. "I'm being set up, just like my father was. Those fingerprints can't be mine because I've never touched that knife." Detective Wells leaned forward, her expression unreadable. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across her face. "You seem very certain about that." "Because I am innocent," Nathaniel insisted, meeting her gaze without flinching. "Someone is trying to frame me, and I think I know why." The interrogation continued for hours, questions circling back and repeating like a twisted carousel. Through it all, Nathaniel maintained his composure, even as the evidence mounted against him. Each piece felt more fabricated than the last, yet somehow perfectly crafted to implicate him. His throat grew dry, his voice hoarse from repeating the same denials. Finally, officers led him to a holding cell, the metal door clanging shut with finality. The small space reeked of disinfectant and despair. Outside, reporters had already begun gathering, their cameras flashing through the station windows like lightning. Nathaniel sat on the hard bench, his father's face floating in his memories. The same tired eyes, the same bewildered expression of a man caught in a system designed to crush him. History seemed determined to repeat itself, but this time, Nathaniel silently vowed, the ending would be different. The courtroom's heavy oak doors creaked open as Nathaniel Dawson entered, his steps measured and deliberate. The room buzzed with whispers and the scratching of reporters' pens. Morning light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Every eye in the packed gallery followed him as he made his way to the defense table, his shoulders square despite the weight pressing down on them. The familiar smell of lemon polish and old books filled his nostrils, a scent that had haunted his nightmares since his father's trial years ago. Judge Charles Mitchell sat elevated behind his bench, his stern face set in hard lines. His gaze, cold and dismissive, barely acknowledged Nathaniel's presence. The judge's reputation for harsh sentences, particularly against black defendants, hung over the courtroom like a dark cloud. His fingers drummed impatiently on the polished wood, wedding ring glinting in the morning light, a symbol of respectability that masked his decades of prejudice. Ryan Jacobs, Nathaniel's public defender, shuffled through a stack of papers, his young face showing signs of exhaustion. Dark circles under his eyes betrayed countless sleepless nights preparing for this case. His suit, slightly wrinkled, contrasted sharply with prosecutor Vincent Turner's immaculate appearance. Jacobs offered Nathaniel a quick, reassuring nod, though the worry in his eyes betrayed his confidence. "All rise," the bailiff called out, the Honorable Judge Charles Mitchell presiding. The proceedings began with Turner's opening statement. He stood tall, his voice carrying authority as he addressed the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence will show that Nathaniel Dawson brutally murdered Isabel Holloway in cold blood. A respected member of our community was taken from us, and justice demands accountability." His words flowed with practiced ease, each one carefully chosen to plant seeds of guilt in the jurors' minds. Ryan Jacobs rose for the defense, his voice slightly wavering. "The evidence will show that my client is innocent, a victim of circumstantial evidence and rushed conclusions." He clutched the edge of the table, steadying himself as he faced the 12 faces that held Nathaniel's fate in their hands. Judge Mitchell's interruption was swift and harsh. "Counsel, stick to the facts." His words cracked like a whip, making several jurors flinch. As witness after witness took the stand, Turner masterfully wove a narrative of guilt. He presented the planted knife, now labeled as evidence, while crime scene photos flashed across a screen. The fabricated witness testimony painted Nathaniel as a calculating killer. Turner moved about the courtroom with confidence, occasionally glancing toward Judge Mitchell with subtle looks of understanding that made Nathaniel's stomach turn. Jacobs attempted objections, but Judge Mitchell consistently overruled them. "Your Honor, this evidence lacks proper foundation," Jacobs protested, a hint of frustration breaking through his professional demeanor. "Overruled," Mitchell snapped, not even looking up from his notes. "Continue, Mr. Turner." The dismissal was casual, as if swatting away an annoying fly rather than a legitimate legal concern. The jury watched the exchange, some shifting uncomfortably in their seats. One juror, an elderly woman, frowned as she noticed Judge Mitchell's dismissive attitude toward the defense. She scribbled something on her notepad, her eyes narrowing thoughtfully at the judge's behavior. Turner approached the bench with another piece of manufactured evidence. The state would like to present Exhibit C, showing the defendant's history of violent behavior. His smile was slight but unmistakable as he handed the documents to the court clerk. Nathaniel's hands clenched under the table, his knuckles turning white. These were lies, carefully constructed to destroy him. He watched helplessly as Turner spun tales of aggression that never happened, creating a past that wasn't his. Each fabrication built upon the last, constructing a prison of falsehoods around him. The morning dragged on, each moment feeling like an eternity. The weight of injustice pressed down on Nathaniel's shoulders, reminiscent of his father's wrongful conviction years ago. The same system that had failed his father was now working to fail him. He could almost hear his father's voice warning him about courts that decided guilt before the trial even began. Judge Mitchell called for a recess, his gavel striking with finality. The courtroom began to empty, but the tension remained thick in the air. Nathaniel sat quietly at the defense table, his mind racing with memories of his father's trial, seeing the same patterns of prejudice and power playing out before him. History was repeating itself in this wood-paneled room, and the familiar taste of injustice was bitter on his tongue. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly in Ryan Jacobs' cramped office, casting harsh shadows across the scattered papers on his desk. Nathaniel sat across from him, his broad shoulders tense, hands clasped tightly in his lap. The clock on the wall ticked away precious minutes as Ryan shuffled through another stack of documents, his tie loosened and shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows. The smell of stale coffee and printer ink hung in the air. "Look, Nathaniel," Ryan said, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "I found something here that doesn't add up." His finger traced along a line in the police report. The timeline they're presenting, it contradicts the witness statements. And the knife they claim to have found? The fingerprint analysis shows inconsistencies. Too many smudges where there shouldn't be any. Nathaniel leaned forward, hope flickering briefly in his tired eyes. "What does that mean for us?" "It means we have something to work with," Ryan replied, though his voice carried the weight of exhaustion. "But Judge Mitchell..." He trailed off, remembering how the judge had dismissed their previous motions without even looking at the evidence, his gavel coming down like a hammer on their hopes. The young public defender stood up and paced the small office, his shoes scuffing against the worn carpet. Law school hadn't prepared him for this, fighting against a system that seemed determined to convict an innocent man. The walls of his office were lined with legal texts, but none of them held the answer to battling institutional prejudice. A framed diploma hung crooked on the wall, a reminder of ideals that now seemed so distant. Ryan stopped at his window, looking out at the city lights. His reflection showed dark circles under his eyes from countless sleepless nights. He'd been making calls to expert witnesses, most of whom were either too expensive or too afraid to testify against the Holloway family's interests. Every door seemed to close before he could even knock. "They've got resources we don't have," Ryan admitted, turning back to Nathaniel. "The prosecution has a team of researchers, expert witnesses on standby, and the media in their pocket." He shuffled through more papers on his desk, revealing newspaper clippings that painted Nathaniel as a dangerous criminal. Headlines screamed accusations that had no basis in fact. The weight of responsibility pressed down on Ryan's shoulders. Each passing day brought new challenges, evidence that seemed to materialize out of nowhere, witnesses whose stories kept changing, and a judge who appeared to have made up his mind before the trial even began. The justice system felt more like a maze designed to trap the innocent rather than protect them. "I won't stop fighting for you," Ryan assured Nathaniel, though doubt gnawed at his confidence. He picked up another file, his hands trembling slightly. "There's got to be something here, something we can use to show the truth. Everyone leaves traces when they lie." As the evening wore on, Ryan immersed himself in case law, searching for precedents that might help their case. His coffee had gone cold, but he barely noticed. The magnitude of what they were up against loomed large. Not just the prosecution's case, but the entire system that seemed designed to maintain the status quo at the expense of justice. The sound of distant sirens filtered through the thin office walls. Nathaniel watched his lawyer work, recognizing the same determination he'd once seen in his father's defense attorney, before that trial had ended in wrongful conviction. Ryan's dedication was clear, but so was his exhaustion and growing uncertainty about their chances of success. The young lawyer's fingers tapped nervously on the desk as he read. "I'm not giving up on you, Nathaniel," Ryan said, his voice firm despite his obvious fatigue. "I'll find a way to turn this around." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with both promise and doubt. A moth fluttered against the window, drawn to the light but unable to break through. The morning sun cast long shadows through the courthouse windows as Nathaniel approached the entrance. His footsteps echoed against the marble floor, each step feeling heavier than the last. The moment he pushed through the heavy wooden doors, a wall of noise and light hit him. Camera flashes exploded like lightning, and reporters thrust microphones toward his face. "Mr. Dawson, how do you respond to allegations of premeditated murder? Did you have a personal vendetta against Ms. Holloway? What about your history of violence?" The questions pelted him like hail. Nathaniel kept his head down, his jaw clenched tight. Ryan walked beside him, trying to shield him from the onslaught. Security guards created a narrow path through the crowd, but it felt like walking through a gauntlet. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was no less oppressive. The wooden benches creaked under the weight of reporters and spectators, their notebooks ready to record every detail. The Holloway family sat in the front row, their expensive suits and stern expressions a stark reminder of their influence. Vincent Turner stood at the prosecution's table, his perfectly pressed suit and confident smile made for the cameras. He shuffled his papers with theatrical precision, occasionally glancing at the jury while whispering to his assistants. The performance was calculated, designed to reinforce the narrative he'd carefully crafted in the media. "Your Honor," Turner's voice carried across the courtroom, smooth and authoritative. "The people would like to present new evidence regarding Mr. Dawson's whereabouts on the night of the murder." He produced photographs that seemed to show Nathaniel near the crime scene, though Nathaniel knew he'd been nowhere near there. Ryan objected, citing the late introduction of evidence, but Judge Mitchell waved him off. "The court will allow it," the judge declared, barely looking up from his notes. The reporters' pens scratched frantically against paper, and Nathaniel could already imagine tomorrow's headlines. Throughout the day, Turner masterfully played to the gallery. Every question he asked, every piece of evidence he presented, seemed designed not just for the jury, but for the evening news. The Holloway family nodded approvingly from their seats, their presence a constant reminder of the power aligned against Nathaniel. Ryan fought back with facts and logic, presenting alibis and timeline discrepancies, but his arguments seemed to dissolve in the face of Turner's theatrical prosecution. The media had already written their story, and facts that didn't fit their narrative were simply ignored. Standing in the courthouse hallway during recess, Nathaniel watched reporters cluster around Turner, hanging on his every word. The prosecutor's voice carried down the corridor. "The evidence speaks for itself. The people of this city deserve justice for this heinous crime." Nathaniel felt the walls closing in. Every headline, every news segment, every whispered conversation in the courthouse corridors seemed to tighten the noose around his neck. But deep inside, beneath the weight of it all, his determination hardened. "I'll prove them wrong," he whispered to himself, his hands balled into fists at his sides. The courtroom fell silent as Vincent Turner rose from his seat, his polished shoes clicking against the floor. His confident stride to the center of the room commanded attention, and even the reporters seemed to lean forward in anticipation, pens poised above notepads, hungry for every word. "Your Honor, members of the jury," Turner began, his voice carrying authority and conviction. "The evidence before you today will prove beyond any reasonable doubt that Nathaniel Dawson murdered Isabel Holloway in cold blood." His words hung in the air like a death sentence, each syllable carefully measured for maximum impact. He moved to a large display board, unveiling photographs of the bloody knife found near Nathaniel's home. The metal gleamed under the harsh courtroom lights, making the dark stains more prominent. Gasps echoed through the gallery, followed by hushed whispers that rippled across the room like waves. "This weapon," Turner continued, pointing to the knife with a manicured finger, "was found just 3 blocks from the defendant's residence. Our forensics team confirmed Ms. Holloway's blood on the blade and Mr. Dawson's fingerprints on the handle." He paused, letting the information sink in, watching satisfaction spread across several jurors' faces. Ryan shifted uncomfortably in his chair, knowing the evidence had been planted. His stomach knotted with frustration as he rose to object, citing procedural irregularities in the chain of custody. But Judge Mitchell's gavel came down hard, the sound cracking through the room like a gunshot. "Objection overruled," the judge barked, barely glancing at Ryan, his contempt barely concealed. "Continue, Mr. Turner." Turner's lips curved into a slight smile as he proceeded to present witness statements, a predator sensing victory. "Margaret Wilson, a resident of Ms. Holloway's building, will testify that she saw Mr. Dawson entering the premises on the night of the murder. She'll describe his suspicious behavior, his apparent agitation." He paced slowly, commanding the space as if it belonged to him alone. The fabricated witness statement seemed to captivate the jury. Their eyes darted between Turner and Nathaniel, who sat rigid in his chair, his hands clasped tightly together, knuckles white with tension. Each lie felt like another nail in his coffin. "But why?" Turner's voice dropped dramatically, almost to a whisper that forced everyone to lean in closer. "Why would Mr. Dawson target Ms. Holloway? The answer lies in their secret relationship, an affair that ended badly when Ms. Holloway threatened to expose Mr. Dawson's violent tendencies. He let the accusation linger, poisoning the air." Ryan jumped to his feet again, heart pounding. "Objection, there's no evidence of any relationship between my client and the victim." His voice cracked with desperation. "Overruled," Judge Mitchell snapped, not even bothering to hide his bias. "The prosecution may continue building its case." As Turner wove his tale of betrayal and revenge, Nathaniel watched the jury's faces change. Doubt turned to conviction, skepticism to certainty. The fabricated narrative was taking hold, becoming reality in their minds. He could almost see his freedom floating away just beyond his reach. Ryan frantically scribbled notes, trying to find inconsistencies in the timeline, gaps in the logic. His pen pressed so hard it nearly tore through the paper. But Turner had crafted his case carefully, each piece of manufactured evidence supporting the next in a seamless web of deception that seemed impossible to break. The pressure in the courtroom grew oppressive, the air thick and stifling. Nathaniel felt sweat beading on his forehead as Turner presented security camera footage, doctored to show someone of his build near Isabel's apartment. The timestamp matched the estimated time of death perfectly, too perfectly, but only Ryan seemed to notice the convenient timing, his frustrated sighs lost in the murmurs of the gallery. Turner's voice rose and fell with practiced precision, drawing the jury deeper into his version of events. "Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence speaks for itself. Mr. Dawson is not the quiet mechanic he pretends to be. He is a calculating killer who thought he could outsmart justice." His words dripped with false righteousness. The words hung in the air, heavy and damning. Nathaniel's shoulders slumped slightly as he watched several jurors nod in agreement, their expressions hardening with judgment. Even with the truth on his side, he could feel his chances of freedom slipping away with each passing moment, like sand through an hourglass that couldn't be turned back. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Ryan sat hunched over his desk, surrounded by stacks of documents and empty coffee cups. His tie hung loose around his neck, and his eyes were red from hours of reading. Crumpled papers littered the floor around his trash bin, evidence of countless failed theories. The clock on the wall showed 2:15 a.m., but he couldn't stop, not when Nathaniel's freedom hung in the balance. He flipped through witness statements for the 100th time, cross-referencing them with the coroner's report. His fingers traced each line methodically, despite his exhaustion. Suddenly, his hand froze mid-page turn. He blinked hard, making sure exhaustion wasn't playing tricks on his mind. The words seemed to jump off the page, screaming their importance. "This can't be right," he muttered, pulling out his notepad with trembling fingers. The prosecution's star witness, Margaret Wilson, claimed she saw Nathaniel entering the building at 9:30 p.m., But according to the coroner's report, Isabel had died between 7 and 8 p.m. Ryan's heart began to race as he dug deeper into the timeline, his pen scratching furiously across the paper. Security footage from Nathaniel's garage showed him working until 8:45 p.m. that night, bent over the engine of a customer's car. Even if he'd left immediately, it would have taken at least 45 minutes to reach Isabel's neighborhood in rush-hour traffic. The pieces weren't adding up, and Ryan felt his pulse quicken with each new contradiction he uncovered. The next morning, Ryan strode into the courtroom with renewed energy, his briefcase stuffed with carefully organized evidence. During cross-examination, he approached Margaret Wilson with careful precision, noting how she nervously adjusted her glasses. "Ms. Wilson, you testified that you saw Mr. Dawson entering the building at 9:30 p.m., correct?" "Yes, that's right," she answered firmly, though her fingers twisted the tissue in her lap. "And you're certain about this time?" "Absolutely. I was returning from my evening walk. I always walk from 9 a.m. to 9:30 a.m. It's part of my daily routine." Ryan turned to address Judge Mitchell, whose stern face already showed signs of impatience. "Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence that directly contradicts this timeline. The coroner's report clearly states dash." "Objection," Turner interrupted, jumping to his feet with practiced indignation. "This line of questioning is irrelevant." Judge Mitchell's face hardened, his jowls tightening with barely concealed anger. "Sustained. Move on, Mr. Jacobs." "But, Your Honor, this timeline is crucial to establishing." "I said move on," Mitchell snapped, his gavel coming down with unnecessary force, the sound echoing through the hushed courtroom. "The court will not entertain these desperate attempts to muddy the waters." Ryan persisted, his voice steady despite his frustration, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the podium. "The evidence shows that Mr. Dawson couldn't have possibly—" "One more word, Mr. Jacobs, and I'll hold you in contempt," Mitchell threatened, his prejudice barely concealed behind his judicial facade. From his seat, Nathaniel watched the exchange with a mixture of emotions churning inside him. Ryan's discovery had kindled a small flame of hope in his chest, the first real chance they'd had at proving his innocence. But watching Judge Mitchell shut down every attempt to present the truth made his stomach churn with anger and despair. His hands clenched and unclenched beneath the table, fighting to maintain his composure. Ryan caught his eye across the courtroom, giving him a subtle nod that spoke volumes. Despite Mitchell's bias, despite the odds stacked against them, his lawyer wasn't backing down. For the first time since his arrest, Nathaniel felt like maybe, just maybe, the truth could still prevail against the wall of prejudice they faced. "We're not giving up," Ryan whispered as he passed by Nathaniel's chair, straightening his papers with determined precision. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of promise, a lifeline in the storm of injustice swirling around them. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Mitchell adjusted his glasses, his stern face betraying no emotion. The air felt thick with tension as everyone waited for his ruling. Sweat trickled down backs, and nervous fingers drummed against wooden benches. Nathaniel's hands trembled slightly, but he kept his head high, clinging to the truth of his innocence like a lifeline in stormy waters. "In the matter of the state versus Nathaniel Dawson," Judge Mitchell's voice boomed through the courtroom, each word falling like a hammer, "this court finds the defendant guilty of first-degree murder." The words hit Nathaniel like physical blows, each one stealing his breath. Each syllable echoed in his ears as Judge Mitchell continued, his tone as cold as winter frost. "Given the heinous nature of this crime, this court hereby sentences you to death by lethal injection." The gavel crashed down with finality, the sound sharp and brutal. It reverberated through the wooden walls, marking the moment Nathaniel's world shattered into 1,000 pieces. His legs weakened beneath him, but he forced himself to remain standing, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing him fall. Around him, the courtroom erupted in a cascade of whispers and gasps, the noise swelling like an approaching storm. Ryan jumped to his feet, his chair scraping against the floor, his voice shaking with desperation and barely contained fury. "Your Honor, we move to appeal immediately. The evidence clearly shows—" "Motion noted." Judge Mitchell cut him off coldly, already gathering his papers with practiced indifference. Court is adjourned. His tone carried the weight of decades of unchallenged authority. Two guards approached Nathaniel, their heavy footsteps echoing across the floor, their handcuffs gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights like serpent scales. The cold metal clicked around his wrists, the sound seeming to echo his racing heartbeat. Camera flashes exploded from the press section like lightning, capturing his moment of defeat in stark black and white, preserving his humiliation for tomorrow's headlines. As they led him toward the door, Nathaniel caught sight of Ryan's face through the chaos. His lawyer's normally composed features were twisted with shock and disbelief, the loss etched deeply in every line. Their eyes met across the chaos of the courtroom, a moment of shared understanding passing between them. "This isn't over, Nathaniel," Ryan called out, his voice carrying over the commotion with fierce determination. "We'll keep fighting, I promise you that." The words offered a small flame of hope in the growing darkness. The guards guided Nathaniel through the courthouse corridors, their grip firm but not cruel. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if his feet were encased in concrete. Reporters shouted questions from every direction, their voices blending into a cacophony of noise that battered his ears. Camera flashes followed his every move, documenting his walk of shame for the evening news. Behind him, he could hear the satisfied murmurs of the Holloway family, their whispered congratulations to each other. Their influence had won the day, their wealth and power proving stronger than the truth itself. The system that had failed his father had now failed him too, completing a cruel circle of injustice. The courthouse steps loomed ahead, where more media waited like vultures, their cameras and microphones raised like weapons. Nathaniel's chest tightened as he faced the wall of reporters, feeling exposed and vulnerable. The afternoon sun felt too bright, too harsh, illuminating his defeat for all to see. The weight of the death sentence pressed down on him like a physical burden as the guards led him toward the waiting prison transport, its dark interior promising to swallow him whole. The marble hallway echoed with the sharp clicks of camera shutters and the thunderous roar of reporters shouting questions. Nathaniel's handcuffs bit into his wrists as the guards led him from the courtroom, their grip firm on his arms. The fluorescent lights above seemed to pulse with each camera flash, creating a disorienting strobe effect that matched his racing heartbeat. His mouth felt dry, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the courthouse's chilly air. "Mr. Dawson, how do you feel about the verdict? What do you say to the Holloway family? Are you guilty, Mr. Dawson?" The voices blended together, becoming a wall of noise that pressed against him from all sides. But something was changing inside Nathaniel. With each step, the weight of despair transformed into something else, a fierce, burning clarity. He had lost everything now, his freedom, his future, his life. And in that loss, he found a strange kind of freedom. The chains on his wrists suddenly felt meaningless compared to the invisible ones that had bound him for years. Halfway down the corridor, Nathaniel planted his feet. The guards tugged at his arms, but he remained immobile, like a statue suddenly sprouted from the courthouse floor. The crowd of reporters fell silent, sensing something was about to happen. Even the air seemed to still around them. "Sir, you need to keep moving," one of the guards said, his voice tight with tension. His partner's hand moved to his belt, fingers hovering near his radio. But Nathaniel was already turning around, his movements deliberate and controlled. The courtroom door stood just 30 feet away, still propped open from the exodus of spectators. Without warning, he began walking back, his stride purposeful. The guards, caught off guard by his sudden change in direction, scrambled to maintain their hold on him, their boots squeaking against the polished floor. The crowd parted before him like water, their cameras still flashing but now with an almost reverent silence. Nathaniel's footsteps echoed in the hushed corridor as he approached the courtroom door. His heart thundered in his chest, but his mind was clear. For the first time since this nightmare began, he knew exactly what he needed to do. Each step felt like reclaiming a piece of himself that had been stolen. He crossed the threshold back into the courtroom, where Judge Mitchell was still gathering his papers, preparing to leave. The judge looked up, his face registering first confusion, then annoyance at the interruption. His bushy eyebrows drew together, creating deep furrows across his forehead. "You've sentenced me to death." Nathaniel's voice rang out, clear and strong, filling every corner of the suddenly silent room. But the real criminal is standing right here. His eyes locked with Judge Mitchell's, unwavering. "You, Judge Mitchell, are guilty of perpetuating a corrupt system." The words hung in the air like thunder before a storm. Then chaos erupted. People jumped to their feet, voices raised in shock and disbelief. Judge Mitchell's face drained of color, his mouth opening and closing without sound as Nathaniel continued to stand tall, shoulders squared, even in his shackles. The judge's hand trembled visibly as he reached for his gavel. "I arrest you, Your Honor, for abuse of power and false sentencing," Nathaniel declared, his voice carrying over the pandemonium. The judge's gavel slipped from his nerveless fingers, clattering across the bench as the room descended into complete disorder. The sound of it hitting the floor seemed to echo like a final verdict. Security guards rushed forward, but they seemed unsure who to protect or restrain. Judge Mitchell remained frozen behind his bench, his authority crumbling in the face of this unprecedented challenge. Camera flashes exploded throughout the room, capturing every moment of this extraordinary scene. Someone in the back began to clap, the sound spreading like wildfire through the stunned audience. The morning news blared across every major network, each channel replaying the extraordinary scene from the courthouse. Nathaniel's face, determined and dignified despite his shackles, filled television screens across America. The headline, "Convicted Man Arrests Judge," blazed beneath dramatic footage of the confrontation. Social media exploded with opinions, hashtags trending as people debated the unprecedented act of defiance. Within hours, video clips had been viewed millions of times, shared and reshared with comments ranging from outrage to admiration. In coffee shops and offices, people huddled around screens discussing the implications. "He's brave," some whispered. "He's standing up against corruption." Others shook their heads, muttering about respect for authority and the sanctity of the courtroom. In diners across town, heated debates broke out between strangers who normally wouldn't exchange more than a polite nod. The Holloway family's carefully cultivated image began to crack under the scrutiny. Their spokesperson held press conferences, denouncing Nathaniel's actions as those of a desperate criminal. Behind the scenes, they made frantic calls to politicians and legal officials, demanding swift action to contain the situation. Money changed hands, promises were made, and threats were issued in hushed tones during private meetings. In her downtown office, Monica Williams watched the coverage with growing interest. Her desk was cluttered with case files from other civil rights battles: police brutality, wrongful convictions, systemic discrimination. But something about Nathaniel's case caught her attention in a way others hadn't. She felt drawn to it, like a compass needle finding north. She leaned forward, studying his face on the screen. The quiet dignity in his stance, the clear conviction in his voice as he confronted Judge Mitchell. It spoke of something deeper than mere desperation. Monica had seen that look before, in the eyes of people who had nothing left to lose but their truth. It was the look of someone fighting not just for themselves, but for something larger. "Turn it up," she called to her assistant as a legal analyst began discussing the implications of Nathaniel's actions. She pushed aside her half-eaten sandwich, completely absorbed in the unfolding story. "This unprecedented move has raised serious questions about judicial accountability," the analyst said. "While Mr. Dawson's actions were technically illegal, they've sparked a national conversation about corruption in our courts. We're seeing demands for investigations into Judge Mitchell's past rulings." Monica's phone buzzed constantly with messages from colleagues and activists, all asking the same question: would she take the case? She had a reputation for handling impossible situations, for taking on the system when nobody else would. But this was different. The Holloway family's influence reached far and deep, and their retaliation would be swift and merciless. Taking this case could mean putting her entire career on the line. She watched as another news segment showed Nathaniel being led away after his confrontation with Judge Mitchell. Despite being surrounded by guards, he walked with his head high, his eyes clear and focused. The camera caught a moment when he looked directly into the lens, and Monica felt a jolt of recognition. She saw in his face the same determination that had driven her through years of fighting seemingly hopeless battles. It was like looking in a mirror. At her desk, Monica pulled up the case files, reading through the details of Nathaniel's trial. The fabricated evidence, the rushed conviction, Judge Mitchell's clear bias, it all painted a picture she'd seen too many times before. But this time, someone had stood up and named the corruption for what it was. Her fingers drummed against her desk as she weighed the risks against her growing conviction that this case mattered more than most. In her cluttered downtown office, Monica Williams sat surrounded by towering stacks of case files and newspaper clippings. The walls were adorned with framed headlines of past victories, civil rights cases she'd won against impossible odds. But for every victory, there were countless defeats that weighed heavily on her conscience. Her desk lamp cast long shadows across scattered papers, each one representing someone the system had failed, someone whose life had been forever altered by injustice. She rubbed her tired eyes, the TV in the corner droning on about Nathaniel's case. The footage played again, a black man in handcuffs standing tall before Judge Mitchell, speaking truth to power. Something about his quiet dignity struck a chord deep within her, awakening memories of why she'd become an attorney in the first place. "Turn it up," she called to her assistant. The volume increased, and Nathaniel's voice filled the room. "You've sentenced me to death, but the real criminal is standing right here." His words hung in the air, powerful and unflinching. Monica leaned forward, studying his face. She'd seen that look before, in the eyes of people who had nothing left to lose but their truth. It reminded her of her first case, when she still believed the system could be changed from within. 20 years and countless disappointments later, she'd grown cautious, selective about which battles to fight, protecting what remained of her once boundless hope. But this was different. The fabricated evidence, the rushed trial, the biased judge, it was a perfect storm of systemic corruption. She pulled Nathaniel's case file closer, scanning the details she'd already memorized. The witness statements didn't add up. The timeline was full of holes. The prosecution's case was built on lies, yet the system had worked exactly as designed, to protect the powerful and punish the vulnerable, especially those who dared to challenge the status quo. Hours passed as Monica pored over every detail. Coffee cups accumulated on her desk as night fell over the city. The sun had long since set when she finally reached for her phone. Her fingers hovered over the keypad, doubt creeping in. Taking this case would mean challenging not just Judge Mitchell, but the entire system that protected him. The Holloway family's influence ran deep in this town, and they would fight back hard, using every resource at their disposal to crush anyone who threatened their power. But Nathaniel's words echoed in her mind. The real criminal is standing right here. With renewed determination, she dialed the number for the county jail, her heartbeat quickening with each ring. "This is Attorney Monica Williams," she said firmly. "I need to arrange a visit with Nathaniel Dawson. Yes, I'll be representing him." She paused, listening to the voice on the other end. "Tomorrow morning will be fine." She hung up the phone and looked at Nathaniel's picture one more time. His eyes held the same fire she'd once had, before years of fighting the system had dimmed it. Maybe it was time to let that fire burn again, to remember why she'd chosen this path in the first place. The next morning, Monica gathered her briefcase and headed to the county jail. Each step through the cold, sterile hallways reminded her of all the clients she'd visited here before, some guilty, many innocent, all caught in the same unforgiving machinery of justice. But this time felt different. This wasn't just another case. This was a chance to expose the corruption at the heart of the system, to finally confront the rot that had been festering for decades. In her dimly lit office, Monica Williams spread out the trial documents across her desk, creating a timeline of events. The papers formed a maze of legal jargon and witness statements, each one a potential piece of the puzzle. Ryan Jacobs sat across from her, dark circles under his eyes betraying his exhaustion. His tie hung loose around his neck, and his usually neat hair was disheveled from running his hands through it too many times. The coffee cup beside him had gone cold hours ago, forgotten in the intensity of their work. "Walk me through everything again," Monica said, her voice gentle but firm. She watched as Ryan shuffled through his notes, his hands trembling slightly. A flash of sympathy crossed her face as she noticed how the young public defender's confidence had been shattered. "I tried my best," Ryan started, his voice cracking. But every time I raised an objection, Judge Mitchell shut me down. Every piece of evidence I wanted to present was blocked. He barely looked at me when I spoke, like I wasn't worth his time. He rubbed his eyes, fighting back frustration. It felt like the verdict was decided before we even walked into that courtroom. Monica nodded, picking up the witness statement that had sealed Nathaniel's fate. Something about it felt off. The language was too perfect, too rehearsed. She'd seen enough witness statements to know when one had been crafted rather than given freely. The words flowed with a legal precision that most everyday witnesses simply didn't possess. "This witness," she said, tapping the paper. "Did you get to cross-examine them?" Ryan shook his head. Judge Mitchell claimed they were unavailable, but I had evidence. Security camera footage from across town showing Nathaniel at his garage during the time of the murder. Mitchell wouldn't even look at it, he just waved it away like it was nothing, said it wasn't properly submitted. Monica's eyes narrowed as she began connecting the dots. She pulled out her laptop, searching through public records of Judge Mitchell's past cases. A pattern emerged. Cases involving the Holloway family always seemed to go their way, regardless of the evidence. Case after case showed the same troubling outcome, with Mitchell presiding like a king over his personal domain. "Look at this," she said, turning the screen toward Ryan. 3 years ago, another case involving the Holloways. Different circumstances, but the same pattern. Evidence disappeared, witnesses became unavailable, and Mitchell presided over it all. The defendant in that case is still serving time. She dug deeper, pulling property records, business filings, and campaign contributions. The connections between the Holloways and Mitchell ran deep. Shared business interests, political donations, even vacation properties held in shell companies. She pinned documents to a corkboard, red string connecting them like a web of corruption. "They've been working together for years," Monica muttered, her finger tracing lines between documents. "This isn't just about Nathaniel. They needed a scapegoat, someone to take the fall quickly and quietly. The Holloways needed this case closed before anyone looked too closely at their family business." Ryan leaned forward, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten. But why Nathaniel? Why him specifically? There must have been other people they could have framed. Monica spread out more documents, revealing a pattern of targeted arrests and convictions. Because he was perfect, a black man with a family history of incarceration. They knew the media would run with it, that the public would believe their narrative without question. Plus his father's case, that couldn't be a coincidence. Nathaniel was starting to ask questions about his father's conviction. Mitchell was the judge on that case too. As they worked through the night, the true scope of the conspiracy began to take shape. The witness statement had been fabricated, the evidence planted, and Nathaniel's alibi deliberately suppressed. It was a carefully orchestrated plan, designed to protect the powerful at the expense of the innocent. The coffee pot emptied and filled again as they pieced together years of judicial misconduct. Monica reached for her phone, ready to start making calls to her contacts in the media and civil rights organizations. This case wasn't just about freeing one man, it was about exposing a system of corruption that had destroyed countless lives. Her fingers hovered over the keypad, the weight of what they'd discovered settling on her shoulders. She looked at Ryan, seeing the spark of hope returning to his eyes. "We've got work to do," she said. Ryan nodded, straightening his tie with renewed purpose, ready to continue the fight that had nearly broken him. Monica's office was buried in stacks of documents, financial records, and court transcripts. The walls were covered with photos and sticky notes, connected by red strings that mapped out decades of corruption. Her eyes burned from staring at her computer screen for hours, but she couldn't stop. Each new piece of evidence made her heart beat faster, pushing her to dig deeper despite the exhaustion settling in her bones. "This goes back 30 years, she muttered, scrolling through property records. The Holloway family had been buying up businesses through shell companies, each transaction coinciding with favorable rulings from Judge Mitchell's court. She found foreclosure cases where Mitchell had ruled against small business owners, only for those properties to end up in Holloway hands months later. The pattern was too perfect to be coincidence. It reeked of calculated corruption. Monica pulled up another document, this one detailing campaign contributions. Mitchell's judicial campaigns had been heavily funded through various companies, all leading back to the Holloways. But it wasn't just money. There were threats, too. She found sealed court records of witnesses who had suddenly changed their testimonies, businesses that had mysteriously closed after filing complaints against Holloway Enterprises. Some witnesses had even moved away entirely, leaving behind homes and livelihoods without explanation. The pattern was clear. Anyone who stood against the Holloways faced Mitchell's wrath in court. Small business owners lost everything. Whistleblowers found themselves facing criminal charges. Witnesses disappeared or changed their stories. The family had built an empire on broken lives and corrupted justice, with Mitchell serving as their personal gatekeeper. In a dusty box of old court records, Monica discovered something even more disturbing. A young lawyer had once tried to expose the connection between Mitchell and the Holloways. 3 days before the hearing, his key witness died in a car accident. The case was dismissed and the lawyer left town shortly after. The official record listed it as a simple dismissal, but Monica could read between the lines. Her stomach knotted as she realized the implications. This wasn't just corruption, it was dangerous. She cross-referenced dates and cases, creating a timeline that stretched back decades. Mitchell's rise to power perfectly aligned with the Holloway family's expansion. Every major business acquisition, every controversial development project, Mitchell had been there, ensuring the family's interests were protected. She traced his career alongside the Holloway fortune, watching both grow in perfect synchronicity. The evidence was overwhelming. Photos of Mitchell at private Holloway events, bank records showing suspicious transfers, transcripts of cases where Mitchell had twisted the law to benefit the family. It wasn't just corruption. It was a carefully orchestrated system of control that had gone unchallenged for generations, allowing both Mitchell and the Holloways to thrive while others suffered. Monica's hands trembled as she realized what she'd uncovered. Nathaniel's case wasn't random. His arrest, the fabricated evidence, the rushed trial. It was all part of the Holloway family's pattern. They needed a scapegoat, and Mitchell had provided one just as he'd done countless times before. Nathaniel was just the latest victim in a long line of people sacrificed to protect Holloway interests. Sitting at her desk, surrounded by the evidence of decades of corruption, Monica felt the weight of her discovery. The Holloway family hadn't just corrupted Judge Mitchell, they'd corrupted the entire system. They'd built their power on the broken lives of people like Nathaniel, using Mitchell as their personal enforcer in the courts. The web was larger and more tangled than she'd ever imagined. She looked at the phone on her desk, knowing that her next move would change everything. The evidence was clear, but exposing it would mean taking on not just Mitchell, but the entire Holloway empire. Her finger hovered over the phone as she considered the risks, and the lives that depended on her courage. In the stark confines of the jail's visitation room, Nathaniel sat across from Monica, his shoulders hunched under the weight of years of accumulated pain. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across his face, highlighting the exhaustion etched into his features. Monica leaned forward, her presence steady and reassuring, as she waited for him to speak. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence between them, each second stretching into eternity. "My father," Nathaniel began, his voice barely above a whisper, "was the most honest man I knew." His hands trembled slightly as he folded them on the metal table. He worked at the local hardware store for 20 years. Everyone in the neighborhood knew him, trusted him. He'd help anyone who needed it, no questions asked. He'd even stay late after closing to help folks who couldn't make it during regular hours. Monica watched as Nathaniel's composure cracked, revealing the raw wound beneath. They didn't even give him a chance to defend himself. The evidence was planted, the witnesses were paid off, and the judge... He paused, swallowing hard. The judge wouldn't even look at him during the trial, just stared at his papers like my father wasn't even human. The pain in Nathaniel's voice grew deeper as he described watching his father being led away in handcuffs, his mother's desperate cries echoing through the courtroom. "I was 15 when they took him. Our family fell apart after that. Mom had to work 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. I dropped out of school to help. His fingers clenched into fists, knuckles turning white. The neighbors who used to smile at us started crossing the street when they saw us coming. Friends stopped calling. It was like we had some disease nobody wanted to catch. Monica listened intently, noting how Nathaniel's story mirrored so many others she'd heard. Families torn apart by a system designed to break them. The bitterness in his voice was familiar, a sound she'd heard countless times in her years of civil rights work. She fought the urge to reach across and take his hand, knowing that professional distance was necessary, even as her heart ached for him. Sometimes, Nathaniel continued, his voice breaking, I think about forgiveness. People say it's the only way to heal. He shook his head slowly, a sad smile crossing his lips. But how do you forgive a system that's built to destroy you? How do you move past knowing that the same people who took my father are now coming for me? Every night I try to let go, but every morning I wake up with the same anger burning inside. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Monica gently prompted him to continue. Nathaniel spoke about the years following his father's imprisonment, the shame, the anger, the constant fear that he'd be next. Each word seemed to release a little more of the burden he'd carried for so long, like stones being removed from an overloaded backpack. My father died in prison last year, he said, his voice hollow. He never got to clear his name, never got to see his grandchildren. They took everything from him, and now... He gestured to his prison jumpsuit, pulling at the coarse fabric. Now they're trying to do the same to me. Sometimes I wonder if this is just my family's fate. Nathaniel's eyes met Monica's, filled with a mixture of rage and determination. Standing up, his posture straightened, as if sharing his story had lightened some of his load. I won't let them win, he declared, his voice stronger now. Not this time. Monica rose to meet his gaze. We'll fight this, Nathaniel, she replied firmly. For your father, for you. The system might be broken, but that doesn't mean we stop trying to fix it. The setting sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as Monica approached her car after another exhausting day of investigation. Her heels clicked against the pavement, echoing in the nearly empty space. The day's discoveries about the Holloway family's corruption weighed heavily on her mind, each piece of evidence more damning than the last. The paper trail she'd uncovered pointed to decades of influence peddling and backroom deals that had shaped the town's justice system. As she drew closer to her vehicle, something caught her eye. A white rectangle tucked beneath her windshield wiper, fluttering slightly in the evening breeze. Monica's steps slowed, her instincts telling her this wasn't just another flyer. With careful movements, she reached out and pulled the paper free, her fingers tensing as they made contact with the crisp edge. The message was simple, typed in bold black letters. Stop digging or you'll be next. The words seemed to pulse on the page, making her stomach clench. Monica's breath caught in her throat as she quickly scanned the parking lot, her heart hammering against her ribs. The space around her was empty, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, as if unseen eyes were tracking her every movement from the shadows between parked cars. She climbed into her car, locking the doors immediately with a decisive click that offered little comfort. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the steering wheel, the threatening note lying on the passenger seat beside her like a venomous creature. The drive home was tense, her mind racing through possibilities. Could it be the Holloway family? They certainly had the resources and motivation to threaten her. Or perhaps Judge Mitchell's allies in the legal system, desperate to keep their corruption hidden. The connections she'd been mapping out had powerful people at every level of local government. Every red light felt like an eternity as Monica checked her rearview mirror, looking for signs of being followed. The familiar streets of her neighborhood offered little comfort tonight, transformed into an unfamiliar landscape of potential threats. She parked in her usual spot, but waited a few extra moments, scanning the area before quickly making her way to her apartment, keys clutched between her fingers like a makeshift weapon. Inside, Monica double-checked the locks on her door and windows, testing each one twice. The threatening note sat on her coffee table as she paced her living room, her professional calm cracking under the weight of personal danger. She'd faced opposition before in her career, but this felt different, more immediate, more dangerous. The coldness of the threat spoke of someone with nothing to lose, or perhaps everything to protect. Yet as the initial shock began to fade, something else took its place: determination. Monica had spent her career fighting against intimidation and injustice. She thought about Nathaniel, sitting in a cell for a crime he didn't commit, staring at concrete walls while the real criminals walked free. She thought about his father, who died before he could clear his name, taking his last breath still labeled a criminal. The threat was meant to silence her, to make her back down from the fight. Sitting down on her couch, Monica picked up the note again. Her hand was steadier now, her resolve strengthening with each passing minute. She wouldn't let fear stop her from exposing the truth. If anything, this threat confirmed she was on the right track. She was getting close to something they desperately wanted to keep hidden, a secret worth threatening for. "I'm not stopping," she muttered to herself, reaching for her phone. The time for hesitation was over. She needed to keep moving forward, regardless of the personal cost. This note wasn't just a threat, it was confirmation that the powerful were beginning to fear what she might uncover. Monica sat in her dimly lit office, surrounded by stacks of financial records and court documents. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight as she carefully connected threads between the Holloway family's various business ventures. Her eyes burned from hours of staring at spreadsheets, but each new discovery pushed her to dig deeper, fueling her determination despite the exhaustion settling into her bones. She pulled up another document on her computer, a series of offshore bank transfers that didn't quite add up. The numbers were carefully hidden behind shell companies and fake names, but Monica had spent years learning to spot these patterns. With careful attention, she traced a payment of $500,000 from a Holloway-controlled account to an entity connected to Judge Mitchell's wife's business. Each connection she found made her heart beat faster, knowing she was getting closer to the truth. "Got you," she muttered, marking the connection in her growing web of evidence. Her fingers trembled slightly as she circled the figure in red, the implications of what she'd found weighing heavily on her mind. A soft noise in the hallway made her freeze. The office building should have been empty at this hour. Monica held her breath, listening intently. Footsteps passed by her door, then faded away. She let out a shaky breath, but the moment of fear had crystallized something in her mind. She was getting too close to the truth, and people were watching. She quickly saved her files to a secure drive and dimmed her computer screen, suddenly aware of how exposed she felt. The next morning, Monica met with a former employee of the Holloway family's main company. The woman spoke in whispers, constantly glancing over her shoulder in the quiet coffee shop. She described years of watching suspicious dealings, of documents that disappeared, of threats made to anyone who asked too many questions. Her eyes were hollow with fear, the price of knowing too much clearly etched on her face. "They own half the judges in the city," the woman explained, her hands trembling around her coffee cup. "Mitchell's just the tip of the iceberg. When they want someone gone, they make it happen. I've seen good people ruined overnight just for asking questions." Monica's mind raced to Nathaniel. His arrest hadn't been random. He'd been working as a mechanic at a garage near one of the Holloway's warehouses. He might have seen something, heard something, without even realizing its significance. The family couldn't risk leaving him free. The realization made her stomach twist with anger and renewed purpose. Back in her office, Monica spread out her evidence. Financial records showed a pattern of payments to various court officials. Property records revealed hidden connections between the Holloways and several prominent judges. And there, right in the center of it all, was Judge Mitchell, whose rulings had consistently protected the family's interests while destroying the lives of anyone who stood in their way. Each document was another piece of the puzzle, another link in the chain of corruption. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture of corruption so vast it took her breath away. This wasn't just about one wrongful conviction. It was about an entire system built to serve the powerful at the expense of justice. The scope of it made her dizzy, but also more determined than ever. Monica glanced at the photo of Nathaniel on her desk, his eyes holding a quiet dignity despite everything he'd endured. She reached for another file, aware of the weight of what she was uncovering but determined to see it through. For him, And for everyone else who had been crushed by this broken system, she would keep digging until the truth came to light. Monica sat across from Kenneth Clark in a dimly lit diner on the outskirts of town. His hands trembled as he stirred his coffee, eyes darting to the door every time the bell chimed. Years of working for the Holloway family had left deep lines on his face and a permanent shadow of fear in his eyes. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting an eerie glow on his pale skin. "You don't understand what they're capable of," Kenneth whispered, leaning forward. "I've seen them destroy people's lives without leaving a trace. Judge Mitchell? He's just one piece of their puzzle. A puppet they control with invisible strings." Monica placed her notepad on the table, keeping her voice steady and reassuring. She reached across, almost touching his trembling hand, but stopping just short. "I can protect you, Kenneth. We can arrange witness protection, make sure you're safe, you don't have to live in fear anymore." Kenneth let out a bitter laugh that seemed to come from somewhere hollow inside him. "Safe? There's no such thing when the Holloways are involved. I've spent 5 years hiding, changing names, moving from city to city. They have eyes everywhere. In police stations, government offices, even small towns where nobody knows your name." Despite his fear, Kenneth began to talk. The words spilled out like he'd been holding them back for years. He described elaborate schemes of money laundering, judicial bribes, and systematic intimidation of witnesses. His voice shook as he detailed how the family had orchestrated the downfall of anyone who dared to challenge them. Names, dates, transactions, everything stored in his perfect memory. "I'll testify," he finally said after hours of discussion, his coffee long gone cold. "But you have to promise me protection, real protection, not just papers and promises." 3 days later, Monica received the call that shattered her morning. Kenneth's body had been found in the Sunset Inn, room 214. The police report called it a suicide, pills and alcohol, a common enough story. But Monica knew better. The timing was too perfect, the circumstances too neat. Her stomach knotted with grief and guilt. She stood in the hotel room, now a crime scene. Yellow tape marked off the space where Kenneth had supposedly decided to end his life. The detective spoke about depression, about guilt, about the typical signs. But Monica saw the truth in the perfectly arranged scene, in the too neat suicide note, in the way the local police seemed eager to close the case. "We'll wrap this up quickly," the detective said, barely looking at his notes. "Clear case of suicide. Nothing suspicious here." His disinterest was palpable, almost rehearsed. Monica felt the weight of Kenneth's death pressing down on her shoulders like a physical burden. He had trusted her, had finally found the courage to speak out, and now he was gone. The Holloways had sent their message loud and clear: silence or death. No middle ground, no second chances. Back in her office, Monica stared at the newspaper article about Kenneth's death. His face looked back at her from the grainy photo. Tired, afraid, but determined. He had known the risks, had faced his fears, and had paid the ultimate price for his courage. A life reduced to 3 paragraphs on page 8. "They're trying to stop us," she muttered, clutching the article in her trembling hands. Anger replaced her grief, hardening her resolve. She grabbed her files, each one filled with evidence that Kenneth had helped her understand. Documents that now seemed stained with his sacrifice. With determination in her steps, she headed for the door. "The truth will come out. I promise you that, Kenneth." Monica's heels clicked against the concrete as she left her office, her mind still churning over the day's discoveries. The streetlights cast long shadows across the empty parking lot, and a cool breeze rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of impending rain. She fumbled with her keys, exhausted after another marathon session of reviewing evidence. Her fingers trembled slightly from too much coffee and too little sleep. The roar of an engine shattered the evening quiet. Monica's head snapped up, her instincts screaming danger before her mind could form the thought. Headlights suddenly blazed to life, blinding her with their harsh glare. The vehicle gunned forward, tires squealing against asphalt, the sound echoing off the surrounding buildings. Time seemed to slow as Monica's body reacted before her mind could process what was happening. She launched herself sideways, her shoulder slamming hard against the brick wall of the building, pain shooting through her arm like electricity. The car missed her by inches, the rush of air from its passing tugging at her clothes and whipping her hair across her face. Her briefcase went flying, papers scattering across the parking lot like fallen leaves in a storm. The vehicle, a dark sedan with tinted windows, screeched to a halt for a moment, engine rumbling menacingly, as if making sure of its message, before peeling away into the night, leaving only the acrid smell of burnt rubber behind. Monica sat on the curb, her hands shaking uncontrollably as she dialed 911. Her shoulder throbbed where it had hit the wall, and her stockings were torn at the knees, small beads of blood forming where skin had scraped against concrete. The operator's voice seemed distant, almost dreamlike, as Monica gave her statement, knowing full well that nothing would come of it. No witnesses, no license plate, no proof. Just another accident that would be filed away and forgotten. "Are you sure you don't need an ambulance, ma'am?" the operator asked, concern evident in her voice. "No," Monica replied, her voice stronger than she felt. "I'm fine." She swallowed hard, tasting fear like metal in her mouth. But she wasn't fine. The message was crystal clear. Back off or die. She could feel unseen eyes watching from somewhere in the darkness, evaluating her response to their warning. The Holloway family had made their move, showing just how far they would go to protect their secrets and their power. Monica struggled to her feet, wincing at the pain that shot through her hip and shoulder. She gathered her scattered papers, many now stained and torn, ruined by tire tracks and puddles. Her mind wandered to Nathaniel, sitting in his cell, counting on her to prove his innocence, his eyes filled with a hope she couldn't bear to extinguish. She thought of Kenneth Clark, who had died trying to expose the truth about the Holloways. The fear was real, settling deep in her bones like an unwelcome guest. But it was overshadowed by something stronger, determination that burned hotter than her pain. She pulled out her phone again, this time dialing the prison's number with fingers that had stopped trembling. She needed to talk to Nathaniel, to assure him that she wasn't going anywhere. The Holloways had just made a crucial mistake. They had shown their hand, proven their desperation. And Monica knew that desperate people made mistakes that could be exploited. The attack had changed everything and nothing. The danger was real, but so was her resolve. Each bruise, each scrape was now a reminder of why this fight mattered, why she couldn't walk away even if she wanted to. The system was broken, corrupted by money and power, and someone had to stand against it, even if that someone was bruised and frightened. Later that night, Monica lay in her bed, ice packs soothing her bruised body, the dim glow of her bedside lamp casting shadows across the ceiling. "This won't stop me," she whispered into the darkness, her voice steady despite the pain that radiated through her. "This only makes me more determined." The pain was a reminder. Every movement, every twinge reinforcing her determination to see this through to the end, whatever that might be. The Holloways had tried to silence her with fear and violence, but they had only succeeded in making her more determined to expose their corruption and bring them to justice, no matter the personal cost. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Nathaniel sat on his narrow prison bed, staring at the concrete wall. The rough surface had become familiar over the weeks, every crack, every imperfection etched into his memory like the details of his own case. His orange jumpsuit felt heavy on his shoulders, a constant reminder of his current reality. The coarse fabric scratched against his skin, another small indignity in a place designed to strip away comfort and dignity alike. Through the small window of his cell, he could see fragments of the outside world. A patch of sky, the occasional bird flying past. But these glimpses of freedom only deepened his despair. The media continued their relentless coverage, painting him as a cold-blooded killer. Every headline, every news report seemed to hammer another nail into his coffin. Each night, he'd close his eyes and see those newspaper photos of himself, face twisted by unflattering angles and harsh lighting, making him look guilty before any verdict was reached. His thoughts drifted to Monica. The dark circles under her eyes during her last visit hadn't escaped his notice. Neither had the way she kept glancing over her shoulder, or how her hands trembled slightly when she showed him the latest case documents. The attempt on her life weighed heavily on his conscience. Each time she visited, she looked more exhausted, more worn down by the fight. Yet she never complained, never mentioned the toll this case was taking on her own life and safety. The sound of footsteps echoing down the corridor pulled Nathaniel from his thoughts. Monica appeared at his cell, her professional attire slightly rumpled, her face showing the strain of sleepless nights. She pulled up the metal chair outside his cell, the scraping sound harsh against the concrete floor. Despite everything, seeing her face brought a flicker of hope he couldn't quite extinguish. "We've made progress," she said, pulling out a folder from her briefcase. "The evidence about Judge Mitchell's connection to the Holloways is starting to come together. We just need more time." "More time?" Nathaniel interrupted, his voice hollow. "More time for them to try to kill you again? More time for them to silence another witness?" He stood up, pacing the small space of his cell. 3 steps one way, 3 steps back. "I've seen what happens to people who fight the system, Monica. My father ... His voice caught, the memory still raw after all these years. "I can't have your death on my conscience, too." Monica leaned forward, her eyes intense despite the fatigue clouding them. "This isn't just about you anymore, Nathaniel. It's about exposing a corrupt system that's been destroying lives for decades." She spread out some documents on the small ledge between them, her fingers carefully arranging each page. "Look at what we've uncovered. The Holloway's influence goes deeper than we imagined. They've been pulling strings in this county for generations." But Nathaniel could barely focus on the papers. All he could see was Kenneth Clark's obituary. All he could think about was the car that had nearly killed Monica. The memory of that phone call still made his heart race with terror. "Maybe some battles aren't meant to be won," he said quietly, the words tasting bitter in his mouth like medicine that couldn't cure the real disease. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken fears and doubts. Through the bars, their eyes met, his filled with guilt and resignation, hers with unwavering determination despite her obvious exhaustion. The distance between them seemed both physical and emotional, the steel bars a tangible reminder of how much stood between them and justice. "I don't want to lose you too, Monica," he finally said, his voice trembling with emotion. The words hung in the air between them, weighted with all the loss and pain that had brought them to this moment. He hadn't meant to say it so plainly, hadn't meant to reveal how much she'd come to mean to him in this impossible situation. Monica pulled her car into the deserted parking lot of an old diner just outside the city limits. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white with tension. The meeting with Jordan Scott had taken weeks to arrange, and every precaution had been necessary. The former FBI agent's life depended on absolute secrecy. She checked her rearview mirror one last time, making sure no one had followed her to this remote location. The bell above the diner's door chimed as she entered, the sound echoing in the nearly empty space. In the far corner booth sat a man with graying hair and tired eyes, his shoulders hunched as if carrying an invisible weight. Jordan Scott looked nothing like the confident federal agent he'd once been. Years of hiding had taken their toll, etching deep lines into his face and dulling the once sharp gaze that had intimidated criminals. "Ms. Williams," he said quietly as Monica slid into the booth. "I've been following Nathaniel's case. It's the same pattern, the same corruption I tried to expose years ago." His voice carried the weariness of someone who had fought too long against powerful enemies. Monica leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me everything." Her heart raced with anticipation, knowing that what she was about to hear could change everything. Jordan pulled out a worn leather briefcase, his hands trembling slightly as he opened it. "I've kept these documents safe for years, waiting for the right moment, the right person." He spread several folders across the table, each one filled with evidence of the Holloway family's crimes. Bank statements, witness testimonies, photographs, everything that connects them to Judge Mitchell's corrupt rulings. His fingers traced the edges of the papers reverently, as if touching sacred objects. Back at her office, Monica and Ryan pored over Jordan's evidence late into the night. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as they organized the documents, building their case piece by piece. Coffee cups littered the desk, testament to their exhaustion. The wall behind them was slowly transforming into a web of connections, photos, and documents linked by colored strings. "Look at this," Ryan said, holding up a document, his eyes wide with disbelief. Judge Mitchell ruled in favor of the Holloways in 17 separate cases, each time dismissing clear evidence against them. The pattern is undeniable. He pinned the paper to the wall, stepping back to take in the bigger picture. Monica nodded, her eyes scanning another file. And here, bank transfers to offshore accounts, all coinciding with those rulings. Jordan's evidence ties it all together. She rubbed her tired eyes, the magnitude of what they'd discovered both thrilling and terrifying. This wasn't just about Nathaniel anymore. It was about exposing years of systematic corruption. In the courtroom the next day, tension filled the air like static electricity. Monica stood tall, Jordan's documents spread before her. Judge Mitchell's face remained impassive, but his fingers drummed nervously on his desk as Monica presented the evidence. Tiny beads of sweat formed at his temples, betraying the calm facade he struggled to maintain. The Holloway family's lawyers jumped up repeatedly, objecting to every piece of evidence, but their desperation was obvious. Their carefully constructed wall of lies was beginning to crumble. Whispers rippled through the courtroom as spectators sensed the shifting tide. Nathaniel sat quietly, watching the proceedings. His heart pounded as Monica methodically laid out the evidence of corruption. For the first time since his arrest, he felt something he'd almost forgotten: hope. Real, tangible hope that the truth would finally come to light. He glanced at Monica, silently thanking her for her unwavering belief in him. The evidence was damning. Photographs of secret meetings, bank statements showing suspicious transfers, sworn testimonies from former employees. Each piece added to the growing picture of corruption that had plagued the justice system for years. As Monica presented each new document, the courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath, witnessing history in the making. The courtroom buzzed with nervous energy as Ryan Jacobs rose from his seat. His shoulders, usually slouched from exhaustion, were now squared with determination. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across his face as he approached the jury, each step deliberate and focused. The wooden floor creaked beneath his worn shoes, punctuating the silence that had fallen over the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ryan began, his voice steady and clear, cutting through the tension like a beacon of truth. "What we've uncovered here goes far beyond one man's innocence. This is about a system that has been corrupted from within." He gestured to the mountain of evidence spread across the defense table, folders and documents meticulously arranged to tell their damning story. Ryan methodically laid out the conspiracy piece by piece, his hands steady despite the enormity of what he was revealing. He showed bank statements linking Judge Mitchell to the Holloway family's offshore accounts, pointing out transaction dates that coincided with key rulings. He presented Jordan Scott's meticulously documented FBI investigation, revealing years of judicial manipulation that had gone unchecked. Photographs showed clandestine meetings between the judge and Holloway family members in parking garages and private clubs where no cameras should have been. With each revelation, the jurors' expressions shifted from skepticism to shock, their eyes widening as the truth unfolded before them. "This evidence isn't just about numbers and dates," Ryan continued, his voice growing stronger with each word, fueled by the injustice he was exposing. "It's about lives destroyed. It's about Nathaniel Dawson, a man who rebuilt engines and rebuilt lives, targeted because he unknowingly threatened their power, a man whose only crime was standing in the way of their greed." Vincent Turner's rebuttal came swift and aggressive. He stood at the podium, his expensive suit crisp and intimidating, his gold cufflinks catching the light as he gestured dramatically. "The defense would have you believe in conspiracy theories," he scoffed, attempting to dismiss years of corruption with a wave of his manicured hand. "These so-called documents could have been fabricated by anyone with a computer and an agenda against our justice system." But his usual confidence wavered as he struggled to explain away the mountain of evidence. His arguments fell flat, hollow words echoing in a room that had already glimpsed the truth. Judge Mitchell, watching from his elevated position, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His face, once mask-like in its certainty, now showed cracks of doubt. Beads of sweat formed at his temples despite the cool temperature of the courtroom. Then Nathaniel rose slowly from his chair. The chains around his wrists clinked softly as he addressed the court, the sound a stark reminder of freedom unjustly taken. "Your Honor," he began, his voice quiet but firm, carrying the weight of years of suffering. "I've spent my life fixing broken things. Cars, machines, they're simple. You find the problem, you fix it. But this system? It's broken in ways that can't be fixed with tools." His words filled the courtroom, touching something deep in everyone present, a truth that resonated beyond the walls of this legal battleground. "I stand here today not just for myself, but for my father, for every person who's been crushed by this corrupt system. The truth isn't just in these documents. It's in every life that's been destroyed by those who abuse their power. It's in the nights I've spent behind bars for a crime I didn't commit, while the real criminals sit in positions of authority." The jury hung on every word, some nodding unconsciously, others blinking back tears at the raw honesty before them. Even Vincent Turner seemed unable to look away, his legal pad untouched as Nathaniel spoke his truth. Judge Mitchell's face had grown pale, the weight of his own corruption visible in his expression, the years of favors and bribes collapsing around him like a house of cards in a windstorm. The morning sun filtered through the high courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floors. Nathaniel Dawson stood slowly, his prison jumpsuit a stark contrast to the polished mahogany of the courtroom. His hands trembled slightly, but his eyes held steady as he faced the jury. The weight of the moment pressed down on his shoulders like an invisible burden, yet somehow he found the strength to stand tall. The room fell silent, every breath held in anticipation. Judge Mitchell leaned forward, his usual stern expression showing a flicker of something different, perhaps uncertainty. The judge's fingers tapped nervously on his bench, an unusual break in his normally controlled demeanor. Nathaniel cleared his throat, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of years of injustice. "I stand before you today," he began, "not just as a man fighting for his freedom, but as a son who watched his father's life crumble under false accusations." His voice grew stronger with each word, resonating with a quiet power that commanded attention. "I was 12 when they took my father away. I remember the sound of the gavel, the click of handcuffs, the tears streaming down my mother's face. That sound of metal against metal has haunted my dreams for 20 years. The jury listened intently as Nathaniel described growing up in the shadow of his father's wrongful imprisonment. He painted vivid pictures of visiting days, speaking through thick glass, watching his father age behind bars for a crime he didn't commit. He described birthday celebrations cut short by prison guards and graduation days with an empty seat in the audience. His words resonated through the courtroom, touching something deep in everyone present, awakening memories and emotions many had tried to bury. "This system," Nathaniel continued, his voice thick with emotion, "it doesn't just lock away bodies, it crushes spirits. It doesn't just take freedom, it steals dignity." He gestured to the courtroom around him, his hands steady now with purpose. "Every day people walk through these doors hoping for justice, but what they find is a machine that grinds down the powerless while protecting the powerful. They come seeking fairness and leave with shattered faith." The jury members leaned forward, caught in the raw honesty of his words. Some wiped away tears, others nodded in understanding. A woman in the front row clutched her handkerchief tightly, her knuckles white with emotion. Even the court reporter's fingers had stilled on her keyboard, captivated by Nathaniel's testimony, forgetting for a moment her duty to record every word. From her seat at the back of the courtroom, Monica Williams watched with pride. Her eyes glistened as she witnessed the transformation of her client into something more, a voice for the voiceless. The legal briefs in her lap seemed suddenly less important than the human story unfolding before her. She saw how his personal story had become a powerful testament to the broader struggle for justice, how his quiet strength had finally found its purpose. Nathaniel spoke of the countless others who had faced similar injustices, people whose names never made headlines, whose stories were buried under paperwork and procedure. He talked about mechanics like himself, working honest jobs, trying to rebuild their lives in a world that seemed determined to break them down. His words painted pictures of families torn apart, communities wounded, and dreams deferred by a system that was supposed to protect them. The silence in the courtroom was absolute, broken only by Nathaniel's clear, steady voice as he laid bare the truth of a system that had failed not just him, but generations before him. His words echoed off the high ceilings, filling every corner with the weight of truth long suppressed, demanding to be heard at last. The jury sat transfixed, their notepads forgotten in their laps. An older man in the second row removed his glasses to wipe his eyes. Judge Mitchell's usual stern demeanor had cracked, revealing glimpses of discomfort as Nathaniel's words struck home. The judge shifted in his seat, his gaze occasionally dropping to avoid the piercing truth in Nathaniel's eyes. The truth of his experience, the raw honesty of his pain, and the dignity with which he presented it all combined to create a moment of profound impact in the courtroom, a moment when justice seemed not just possible, but inevitable. The courtroom hung in suspense as Judge Mitchell adjusted his glasses, his hands trembling slightly as he held the verdict. The morning sun streamed through the high windows, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floor. Nathaniel stood tall, his heart pounding against his ribs, hands clasped tightly in front of him. Beads of sweat formed on his forehead as he waited for the words that would determine his fate. In the matter of the state versus Nathaniel Dawson, Judge Mitchell's voice echoed through the silent chamber. On the count of first-degree murder, we find the defendant. The pause felt eternal, each second stretching like years in Nathaniel's mind. Not guilty. The words crashed through the courtroom like a wave. For a moment, everything stood still, as if the world itself needed time to absorb what had happened. Then chaos erupted. People jumped to their feet, some cheering, others muttering in disbelief. The Holloway family stormed out, their faces twisted with anger, pushing past reporters who scrambled to catch their reactions. Monica's eyes filled with tears of joy as she gripped Ryan's arm in celebration, her professional composure finally breaking. Nathaniel remained frozen, the words "not guilty" still ringing in his ears like a beautiful melody he couldn't quite believe he was hearing. Years of pain, fear, and uncertainty began to melt away from his shoulders. His shoulders, which had carried the weight of false accusations for so long, finally relaxed. He turned to look at Monica, who was beaming through her tears, her face radiating the triumph they had fought so hard to achieve. In a quiet corner of the courthouse, away from the reporters and cameras, Monica and Nathaniel sat together on a wooden bench. The afternoon light filtered through nearby windows, casting a warm glow around them, highlighting the dust particles that danced in the air. The sounds of the celebrating crowd seemed distant now, like waves crashing on a faraway shore. "I never thought this day would come," Nathaniel said softly, his voice thick with emotion. His hands, usually steady from years of mechanical work, trembled slightly as he wiped his eyes. The calluses on his fingers told the story of a man who had rebuilt engines while his own life remained in pieces. Monica smiled, her own eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You never gave up, Nathaniel. Even when things seemed impossible, you kept fighting." She reached out and squeezed his hand, feeling the strength in it despite its trembling. "You've shown everyone what real strength looks like." Nathaniel nodded, taking in the moment, savoring the feeling of freedom that was still so new and fragile. The burden of being wrongfully accused, the shadow of his father's fate, the constant fear, it was all lifting away like morning fog. For the first time in years, he could see beyond the next court date, beyond the next legal battle. He could see a future where he wasn't defined by what had been done to him, but by what he could do with his freedom. "Thank you, Monica," he said, his voice steady now, finding its strength again. "Not just for fighting for me, but for believing in me when nobody else would." He looked around the courthouse, the place that had once represented all his fears, its marble columns and wooden panels now seeming less intimidating. "I know the system isn't fixed, but maybe we showed them that the truth still matters." Monica nodded, understanding the depth of what they'd accomplished together. The victory wasn't just about one case. It was about proving that justice was still possible, even in a system that seemed designed to prevent it. It was about one small light in a darkness that had consumed too many lives. The weight of their journey together hung in the air between them. The threats, the danger, the moments of despair when all hope seemed lost. But now, sitting in the quiet of the courthouse, they could finally breathe without the heaviness in their chests. Nathaniel's future stretched out before him, full of possibilities he hadn't dared to imagine before, like stars appearing after a long, dark storm. Nathaniel stood on the courthouse steps, his face turned toward the sprawling city before him. The morning sun painted the buildings in shades of gold and amber, a sight he hadn't truly appreciated in years. His shoulders, once heavy with the burden of false accusations and a corrupt system, felt lighter now. The crisp autumn air filled his lungs as he took deep, deliberate breaths, savoring each moment of newfound freedom. He closed his eyes briefly, letting the gentle breeze brush against his face like an old friend welcoming him back to the world. Monica stood beside him, her professional demeanor softened by a gentle smile. She watched as Nathaniel absorbed the scene before him, understanding the magnitude of this moment. The courthouse behind them, once a symbol of injustice and despair, now served as a reminder of their victory against a broken system. Her fingers tightened around the handle of her worn leather briefcase, the same one that had carried the documents that finally set him free. Together, they walked down the busy city streets. The sidewalks buzzed with the usual morning crowd, people rushing to work, vendors setting up their carts, cars honking in the distance. But for Nathaniel, everything felt different. Each step carried him further from his past and closer to a future he could finally shape for himself. The simple act of walking freely, without guards or schedules, felt like a miracle he couldn't quite believe. Monica matched his pace, her briefcase swinging lightly at her side. They passed the local diner where they had spent countless hours strategizing his defense, the park where they had first discussed taking on the Holloway family's corruption, and the mechanic's shop where his life had changed forever. But now, these places held different meanings. What were once landmarks in his struggle had transformed into milestones of triumph. "You know," Nathaniel said, his voice steady and clear, "I never thought I'd feel this way again, like I have control over my own life." He paused at a crosswalk, watching the traffic flow past. "It's not just about being free. It's about having the chance to make things right." His hands, calloused from years of mechanical work, trembled slightly as he pressed the pedestrian button. Monica nodded, understanding the depth of his words. The bond between them had grown beyond that of attorney and client. They had fought together, faced threats together, and ultimately succeeded together. Their shared experience had forged something stronger, a partnership built on trust and mutual respect. She had seen too many cases end in heartbreak, but Nathaniel's had reminded her why she became a lawyer in the first place. As they walked, Nathaniel noticed details he'd missed before. The way sunlight reflected off building windows, the sound of children laughing in a nearby playground, the simple pleasure of walking freely down a city street. Each sensation reminded him that he was no longer bound by false accusations or corrupt justice. He was free to build the life he'd always deserved, to make choices that weren't shadowed by his past. The weight of his father's wrongful conviction still lingered, but it no longer defined his every waking moment. The city stretched out before them, full of possibilities. Nathaniel felt a surge of determination. He knew the system was still flawed, still needed change, but he was no longer its victim. He was ready to start anew, to use his experience to help others who faced similar battles. With Monica beside him, he felt prepared for whatever challenges lay ahead. For the first time in years, hope wasn't just a distant dream. It was as real and solid as the ground beneath his feet. If you enjoyed the story of Nathaniel, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.